Hello, welcome to the Writing Gals. We are four sweet authors minus one tonight. Poor Amy is feeling sick, and Judy isn't feeling super well. Also, we've got the pre-fall crud descending on all of us, I think. Victorine is joining us from a cruise somewhere in the middle of paradise.
Right, between Jamaica and Galveston, Texas.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
So we are further apart than we usually are. But all here together to talk about pacing tonight. But before we get into our topic, Judy, why don't you give us an update on what's going on in your writing world?
Yeah, I'm sick in my real world. So in my writing world, so I have been switching between what I thought I wanted to do for the past month, but I think I finally figured out what I want to actually write. So I am just working on a book in my adult series and hoping to get the first chapter written. So I have like most of it written, and I'm excited to move on because I'm getting excited about it. So it's fun, and I'm telling myself that I can write this one fast. So that'll be good too. I need lots of positive thinking. So
you can do it. And look, yeah. Amy's here. Look at her, this stalwart lady joining us, even though she doesn't feel good tonight.
Yeah, we both just took NyQuil, so this will be fun.
Yeah, it should be an interesting podcast if we all took NyQuil, but I'm not sick. Where's some wood? Okay. Hey, Amy, since you're here, do you want to tell us what you're doing? Because you just had a book come out, right?
Yeah, so Her Ex, number 4 of my Braxton Brothers series just came out today. And I think last time I checked, it's $5.75 in the store. But I had quite a bit of pre-order, so I think that helped boost it up. So now it's keeping it high for a period of time. So that's all. And then I'm working on a few other projects, getting those written at kind of a rapid pace. Being sick was not on my schedule of things to do. And my lovely kids all got me sick. So I'm trying to keep up with all of my schedule that I did. It looks like Tammy's trying to say something to us. Excuse me. Sorry. So I'm trying to write and plan for the next couple of months. So
that sounds awesome. Yeah, so I guess we're also joined by Tammy Deeren tonight, who is Victorine's roommate on the cruise, and she is one of our friends. And we've enjoyed being on a writer's retreat with her before, but now she's just having fun with Victorine. So, like, whatever, guys.
You're having a blast here.
I'm sure you are. So just keep telling us what you're doing, Victorine. What's going on with you?
Tammy and I are on the Writing Excuses cruise, and so we're spending tons of time on a beautiful ship in the middle of the Caribbean writing and getting lots of words down and having a ton of fun. And so I've been working on my nonfiction, how to write a swoon-worthy second chance romance, where I go through one of my second chance romances and talk specifically about the nuances of how to write a second chance romance. And Tammy's in the background saying, "Hi, Mom," because she wanted to hold one of those signs like at what do you call it?
At a concert?
Like on the news when they're all in the background holding up
like signs. The Today Show or something like that.
Yeah, like the Today Show. So she's holding up her sign. And then we have these beautiful towel animals behind me on the other side. So we're just having a ball.
Living in the lap of luxury there.
Yes.
So I am writing Christmas, guys. It's the beginning of the end of September, if that makes sense. It feels like September is going to be over in no time. But I'm lighting Christmas candles and listening to Christmas music and writing Christmas story. So it's really fun. And I just am trying to line up my schedule for what I want to release for the rest of the year, because we all know those big / difficult months are ahead of us. And I think a lot of us are feeling a continued slump in sales as September goes on. And so it's time to plan, it's time to buckle down and get ready to make things happen. So for me, that means getting some words down. I caught up on my expenses, you guys. So I went through and I printed out invoices, things that I spent, and refreshed my report. And would you believe I made this like crazy realization that the month that I spent the most on like covers and editing and promotions, it was the next month that I made that was my highest month for the year. And I was like, well, that makes sense, doesn't it? So I'm looking to spend some money, getting some books covered and edited and ready to publish and some books promoted. So it was kind of a cool moment for me, business-wise. But tonight we're not talking about business or publishing in any way, shape, or form. We are talking about the craft of story pacing. And everybody knows that this just lights me up when I get to talk about fun stuff like this instead of like sales, which are only fun if you're getting them. So first, let's start off. Anybody want to tell us what pacing is?
Like the rhythm of your story, kind of.
Ooh, I like the word rhythm. That's awesome.
I'm a musician, so you know.
Yeah. I was kind of thinking you could compare it to running. You know, like if you're a marathon runner, then you don't want to be going like full sprint all the time. You have to measure how you do things, the speed you do it, the energy you're putting into it, with the result you want to get out of it. You know, you have to make things happen. If you're going to sprint, then you know you have to put certain things in place to sprint, and there's a different reason to do all the different things, like whether you want your reader to read fast or whether you want them to slow down and take in some details, whether you want them to, you know, get really, really deep into your world, or whether, you know, this is kind of a short story that you want them to power through and quickly in one gulp. So there's a lot to do when you're considering your pacing and how you want your readers to move through your story. So can somebody talk about why pacing is important?
Well, I think it's important because you don't want to go too fast and then set yourself up for a pace that's super fast throughout the whole rest of the book, and then you're skipping over parts and going too fast. Or if you're too slow, then your readers could get super bored. So you want to make sure you're pushing your story forward at a good pace throughout the whole thing.
Yeah, and even like different genres will have different paces. So like thrillers, you don't want to, you know, let them go. Where fantasy, if it's like a huge epic fantasy, then you're okay taking a little time here and there and having longer chapters.
Yeah, and can your pace change through the book? So that's what I usually think is interesting, is your pacing needs to come at different points. You know, you need to be slow at some points. Your reader can kind of pause and savor something, or take in some details that you don't want them to miss that they're going to need later on. And sometimes even to give them a break because they've been going through so many action sequences that they need a moment to kind of pause and relax and think about what it all means. And then there are times when, you know, you need to be propelling them forward and keeping them engaged so they're turning those pages and getting hooked more and more and more into the story. So there's definitely a lot to take into consideration.
I also think too, pacing doesn't necessarily have to be over the story arc. It can be in how you're pacing your sentences, sentence length. So like if you're doing an action scene, you could say, well, they need to be short, you know, scene, like sentences that are very poignant. Like, because if they were long, drawn out sentences, you wouldn't feel that intensity. But since we're romance authors, I like to think about before a kiss happens, the pacing is very, very staccato almost, because it's an intense scene that they're building up to something. And then during, and then kind of that emotional thinking and cadence inside of the kiss, you can do a little longer and drawn out, because now, you know, you just think about you're reaching a pinnacle and you're coming back down. So
Yeah.
it can be just in your sentence structure, and how long and short you make your sentences can give a rapid pace or a slower pace as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. It's kind of like the micro and macro purposes of pacing, and like you said, especially when you're talking about a kiss, like how long can you really kiss somebody, and then describe kissing somebody. It's a kiss, the pacing of a kiss can be really, really, really tricky, because you want the reader to be able to just really experience it and for it to last and be this, really healthy sized moment. But you have to remember it's really only seconds or at the very most minutes passing here. And so your pacing with how you describe it is going to determine how long your reader can, really settle into that moment, and how long can you stretch it out. So there's so much fun stuff that we're going to kind of dig into it a little bit and talk about all the different factors of pacing. First, I want to talk about how do you make your story move faster? What are some tips and tricks that you know of to get things moving?
Always have
Shorter sentences.
short
Go
sentences.
ahead.
Always have like some kind of conflict going that makes it seem like there's a lot going on, and don't just add random things that aren't important. Like she ate a granola bar and then she went on the bus, and then you don't need that stuff. Just do the scenes that actually matter to the story and skip the rest. That keeps the pace. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I know my first book ever that I finished and published, I had a really hard time moving from one scene to the other. So she would go to bed at night and I would feel like I needed to start the next chapter when she woke up the next morning, and I think one of the things that we all have to learn as authors is how to move through time, to be able to transition between scenes without feeling like we have to take the reader through every single thing that happens in that character's life, because that is a huge part of pacing. If you're dragging your reader through minute details and everyday events and all these things that happen but aren't actually important to the story, then your story is going to drag and be boring, and that pace is really going to slow down. Where if you're able to jump from one day, like a critical event one day, to the next critical event with a seamless transition, then your pace is going to move a lot quicker. Yeah.
And one of the things that I learned from the writing excuses people was they would always say like in late, out early. And so like jump in right when the scene, when the interesting stuff is happening, and then get out as soon as the interesting stuff is done, and then move to the next.
Yeah. I like to use as little detail as possible if I'm trying to move things fast. And so just keep the important things, the things that the reader actually needs to know, or if you're trying to set a scene or describe a character, like build characterization, go for really concrete, vivid kinds of details that will do a lot of work, like powerhouse words, instead of using vague things that just need a lot of description or a lot of words to accomplish what you can do really, really short. One thing that's interesting is somebody mentioned using short sentences, but you can also break your paragraphs up more. So if you're looking at a page and it's solid text, like big blocky paragraphs, then it's harder to get through. But if you have shorter paragraphs even, then you move quickly. And dialogue always moves more quickly than exposition does. So those are a lot of things that you can really work with, how you structure your writing so that the reader gets through it more quickly. And I would also like to point out that your word usage and the voice of your writing can increase your pacing or slow it down. So something that's more formal or has more complex sentences is going to slow the reader down, instead of, the short, simple, to the point, and easy to read sentences will allow the reader to just read through it really quickly. So we're going to do conversely. How do you slow the story down?
Long, flowery sentences.
Well, I'm trying to figure out when you would want to slow a story down.
Just like when they need, if there's been an intense scene, then they need after the scene.
So basically, you need some of that scene and sequel where you had a scene and now you need to analyze what happened or have your character analyze what just happened.
Yeah, just give them a chance to breathe.
And sometimes it can be a conversation with somebody else, and then it could just be thinking. And sometimes it's not necessarily like one chapter is a scene, and then the next is the sequel, and then the next is the scene. Like sometimes you can have scene and sequels inside a same chapter. So like you have the let's go back to A Kiss. You have the sequel before the kiss, which is like, is this going to happen? They're thinking about it. Then it's the kiss. Then it's the interruption, and then it's the sequel again. So that can happen all within within a chapter of a story.
And it doesn't always have to alternate either. You can do scene, and sequel, or
Yeah, I think it's kind of like if you're watching a scary movie, they will oftentimes throw in that laugh to kind of give the reader a break and a chance to regroup and reset and pull them back from the brink of freak out or something like that. So I think that the pacing has a similar effect that sometimes it can be exhausting to just like if you were to read a car chase followed by an explosion followed by a fight in a factory as they're trying to rescue somebody, and then then there's a mad race across town because there's really a bomb somewhere else. If it's just like boom 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 boom, action 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 dialogue all the time, then you never have a moment where the reader can take everything in and draw conclusions and put pieces together and figure out how they feel about things. I think pacing also, if you slow a story down, it can also give you the opportunity as an author to let them notice smaller details, to really bring something to their attention, because when you're going at a fast pace, it's not the time for intricate details. But if you need them to slow down and notice something, then that's a good time to really settle in and allow them to stop and look around and see and sense, taste, hear, smell. All those things are going to happen if you slow the pace down. So there's a difference, since we're talking about how you slow your story down, between slowing things down and making them drag. So you don't ever want your story to drag and become boring. It's two completely different things. So what would make a story drag to you guys?
Unnecessary details, things that aren't important. If you're just describing stuff, or because you did a lot of research and you want to put a bunch of stuff that you found out in your book, that is a big one for people. That's just, it slows it way down and it's not necessary to the plot. You just need to cut a lot of that.
Absolutely.
For me, it's when the love interests aren't together. I'm like, this is boring. I don't need to read about this. I want to get him back. Let's bring him back. Never without a shirt on.
Yeah, for me, it's if the love interest is in there, or if there's the fight scenes, I'm like, this is boring. Give me the love again.
And even if you're not reading a romance, if it's characters that you don't care about, and so that's something as an author that you can mess up on. If you just keep bringing back these characters into the story or the subplot that isn't working for the reader, then it drags and it's boring, and they'll put it down and they feel like it's slow, even if it's not, because it's something that they don't want to read. And that is where the dragging and the boring aspect comes into it, is it's something that the reader doesn't want to read. So you can slow a story down and they still want to read it. They still want to drink every single word and savor it. So a lot of this just comes down to, I feel like, for one thing, sharpening your instincts by reading other books and seeing what to you works as far as the pacing. Pacing is all about, to me, what keeps the reader turning the page, even if the story is, going more in depth or going slower, but I'm still turning that page, then it's working. But if I'm somewhere where I can put the book down, then it's not. So to me, I think everybody should read a lot of books and pay attention to how they're feeling as far as like how immersed they are in the story and how committed they are and anxious to turn the page. So we talked a little bit about how you know if it's going too slow. How do you know if it's going too fast? Because guess what? I just read a review yesterday or today that was calling me out on not going enough into the backstory or giving enough details or fleshing the story out for them. Because yes, I've written a lot of 30,000 word stories lately, and that is a tricky thing to write short and still give enough detail. But I really do like that fast pacing. So I'm always trying to find that balance, and sometimes I don't, and sometimes I don't find it for everybody. So how do you guys know if yours is moving too fast?
So usually for me, I need some outside readers to tell me, like, because it's all in my head, but sometimes I don't put it all in the book, and so I need an outside opinion of saying, wait a minute, I got confused here, you went too fast.
Yeah, I think that's
Sometimes when I hit a roadblock in I'm sorry, Judy.
I was just agreeing with Victorine.
Oh, okay. Are you good?
Yeah.
Sometimes when I hit a roadblock where I feel like I have writer's block, normally that means I've written myself somewhere into a corner, and somewhere in the previous chapters I didn't do something I should have done. So that's when I take a moment and I go back and I read through and be like, and even just when I'm reading through, I'm like, oh, this would be because let's say you're halfway through your story and you're trying to wonder if your pacing is too fast, or you feel like you've hit a roadblock and you don't know where to go. You can go back and be like, oh, here would be a great place for me to add in that little nugget that I added in chapters like I just finished. I could put this here in the beginning, do some foreshadowing. Maybe give a little more description or detail that will help the reader as they move forward into the story, and then they'll pick up on that nugget that I just planted. And that normally, once I read through that, I'll know where the fast parts are, where I need to slow down, and then it'll help me actually beat that roadblock and go. Because when I write longer, but I write fast, and so sometimes I have a hard time remembering what I wrote previously. But I rely on that instinct to be like, okay, if I'm slowing down, and this is the same thing with my pacing going too slow. So if I'm bored in my writing, I know my pacing's too slow. And if I'm bored, then my readers are going to be bored. So that's when I'm like, okay, enough of this chit chat back and forth between the two of them. I need to get things moving because, feels like I'm bleeding words onto my keyboard. So that's how I know, all right, I need to pick something up now and we need to get moving again in the story.
Yeah, I think the biggest trigger for me to realize that I'm moving too fast in my story and I need to slow down is when it's almost all dialogue. And I love dialogue. But if I look at, a chapter and it's just mostly dialogue, then I realize, okay, hold on. I need to put some details. I need to put some description. I need to put some internal thoughts and feelings. And you have to go back in. And so like someone could read one of my chapters in rough draft form and just boom, it just would move like this. And I don't necessarily want them to move at that pace through the story. And I don't want it to just be all dialogue, because dialogue can be so helpful in a lot of ways, but it can also keep everything very surface, especially if your reader or your characters aren't really talking a lot about real things that matter, and they're trying to keep secrets or keep everything on the surface, and they're not revealing what's going on inside. Then you need to slow down and show what are they feeling, what are they thinking, what are they sensing around them. All those things. I am losing depth is really what I'm trying to say. I'm losing the depth of my story by moving too quickly through it. And yeah, the reader might enjoy going through it like really, really fast, but they might appreciate it even more if the action continued at the same rate, but they were able to kind of slow down and savor it and get more out of it along the way. So it's always this really funny balance that we have to play with every scene. So have you guys seen some new author pacing mistakes that you'd like to mention? Maybe some of your own or others that you've seen before?
Yeah, for me, it was I think it was Victorine, or maybe it was you. One of you guys said it before. It was just the thinking you needed to add, what happened every single day in the book. I did that with my first book. I was like, oh, okay, well, she went to bed. Next morning, I took a shower, and then I went to school, and then whatever. So yeah, you don't need to do that. Just go to the interesting parts. So that's something I learned.
For me, I've seen people who they have their characters start in one area, and then all of a sudden 3 paragraphs later, they're in a completely different area, but they don't talk about how they got from point A to point B because it's going too fast. And they're doing what you're talking about, where they're too heavily on dialogue, and they think you're just going to know. And the reader's like, wait a minute, wait, what? They were moving? When? I missed that. So that's a mistake that I have seen.
Yeah. So one of the things that my critique people and editors call me out on all the time is I often have too much exposition at the beginning of my chapters. So I feel like I have to really get into detail and explain this and explain that and explain this. And sometimes, a little bit is needed, but usually you can just jump right into the scene of a chapter. And that is one of the things I think more and more new authors struggle with, is that they just feel like they have to give you all this information. And it is not just in first chapters, it's all the way through the book, that they just start every scene or every chapter feeling like, okay, here's everything you need to know for this particular scene. And it slows you down every time. It's like, oh, here's this wall I have to climb over before I get into, the fun stuff of this scene. And so almost all the time, if you find yourself writing paragraphs of exposition, narration at the beginning of a scene or a chapter, try taking it out and seeing what happens. It's really interesting because most of the time you don't even need it. You subconsciously already know that you need to filter that stuff in through the chapter, and what you wrote at the beginning is just all redundant information anyway. So
there's another one I've seen where it's just too much action. So it's an action scene followed by an action scene followed by an action scene, and new authors sometimes don't realize you need to put more things in between those to slow it down and give the reader a little break from all the action.
And I think too, in the beginning chapter 1s are so hard, but people have a tendency to want to write that first gasp sentence that they write, and then it's like 15 paragraphs of exposition, and you're like, well, wait a minute, where does this first sentence, they all were dead or something, where does this fit in this entire back history of this planet or something like that? So that's a huge mistake, I think. And for me also in romance, it's the love interest doesn't show up in the first chapter. That's another big pacing mistake, because I'm like, honestly, all that stuff you told me about her owning the shop from her grandma and how hard she works and the memories of cooking with her, I'm like, I don't really care about any of that. I'm like, bring the guy in. Let's go. Let's get moving. So
yeah, I always even try to get him on like the first page, like as soon as you can, because that's what romance readers care about.
Well, and if you don't, you're going to confuse the romance, right? Because then they're like, well, wait, so now is this landlord her love interest, this old landlord man? Is this her? Readers want to pick up on these things, on who's going to be what. They want to assign everybody right away. Yeah. And if it's taking you a while to get into it, then they just get frustrated.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And another interesting thing I've seen a lot of is people who need to pick up the pace of their dialogue itself. So there's the overall, pacing of the book. But I really feel like the pacing of action scenes and dialogue need to be looked at in and of themselves. Because with dialogue, you need to worry about if your characters can say something in a shorter way, you almost always need to get them to say it more quickly. If you're trying to make someone sound really like formal or boring on purpose or awkward, then put all those extra words in. But if you want them to sound smart, if you want them to sound funny, if you want them to be, at all interesting, then they need to say things as quickly as possible. So look at your dialogue and just figure out how many words you can take out, because that changes the pacing of your dialogue itself. If I just was watching His Girl Friday with Cary Grant and what is her name? I'll remember later. It's an old movie, and it's got some of the fastest moving dialogue of any movie ever. And at that point, the director literally recorded and timed the dialogue to make sure it was the fastest dialogue ever at that point, because he literally made a point of doing that. And it's really interesting. He said they need to talk over each other. He told the actors, talk over each other, don't finish your sentences. And he was just, giving them all these really weird things that as actors, they were trained to stop and say your lines and pronounce everything completely and make sure you don't, jump in before the other author is done with their line. He was telling them, forget all that, talk this way on top of each other all this time. And the reason he did that was to keep it moving, keep it moving, keep it moving. And it made these characters look so smart and intelligent, like their brains were just moving at a faster rate than everybody else's. It had this really cool effect. And it's the same thing with our writing. We can't have them interrupting each other in the same way, because we have to write it out. But if you can cut down on how many words people say things in, then all of a sudden your characters are having these really witty conversations like we all wish we would have, like later. Like we always think back on a conversation, we're like, man, I wish I would have said this or would have said that, or just like those people who can come in with those witty comebacks like in a heartbeat. Your characters can look like that if you pace your dialogue right. And like, have you ever read a fight scene where it seems like it takes forever for someone to actually punch somebody? Or where a car is crashing and it takes like 2 pages for the car to crash, when in real life it happens like that. So it's just sometimes we get ourselves into a lot of trouble with our pacing, and it makes things not even realistic.
And with dialogue, it's easy to try and put in all that pleasantry stuff that you don't need. You don't need, hi, how are you? All that stuff that people actually say, but you don't want to put it in your book.
Yeah, I always have to delete a lot of wells and and
But then if you do that, if you keep them out of your dialogue and then you do put one in, then it has impact, right? Then if you have a character going, well, and it's the only time you've had it, or if it's the only character that does that, then it means something and it has impact. And so that's one of the really cool sort of side effect benefits you can get from, working on your pacing. So one of the things that we've talked about this before, the 4 of us, I think it's really one of the last things I want to talk about is there are a lot of writing rules for do it this way or don't do it this way or blah, 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 blah. And one of the ones I want to talk about with pacing is the show, don't tell rule. Because show, don't tell is great, but it really, really impacts your pacing. And you just have to understand how it works as a tool so you can use it appropriately for what you want to do. So does anybody want to talk about show, don't tell and how it hurts or helps your pacing?
Well, we joke about this sometimes because it seemed to be one of the topics that comes up that I think, as a beginner writer, I was very much like, oh, you have to show everything. You can't tell anything, and we made a joke. We were going to write a book called I walked across the room or something like that. And Michelle did it perfectly. It was basically like I put my hand out and I turned the doorknob, and then I pulled the door open, and then I stepped my left foot forward, and then I stepped my right foot forward. And it's like how many words can you take to write I walked across the room, which literally finishes that entire book that she just created. So you get fall into the trap of describing things that aren't necessarily just needed to be described, or actions that don't need to be talked about. You want to focus on the things, like, can you imagine how cluttered and boring a movie or a book that has to do with like a mystery being solved would be if it got cluttered up with things that you didn't need to know? And you would be so confused and so like off of what everything was going on, that even if you figured out what happened in the end, you still couldn't go back and be like, oh yeah, so this happened, which hinted to that, and this happened, which hinted to that. I mean, I'm thinking like the Sixth Sense, where they were like everything that was bad was red or something. They have all these different things that you didn't notice, but then you can go back and be like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that totally makes sense. Or when he breathed, he didn't breathe cold, or something like that. They have all these things that weave together that show you that one thing. But if it's all interrupted by unnecessary detail, your readers get frustrated. And so when you do something, you mention something, it has to be important. If not, you need to throw it away. One of the things I can think of is like a gun. If you mention a gun, at some point that gun has to go off or it has to come out. It has to be addressed, because that is a huge something to put into your story that a reader is going to expect to have something that addressed at some point. And if you don't address it, then they're going to what happened to the gun. So for me, only showing the things that are important and that have meaning. And that goes back to like a theme in your story too. Like if you have themes that you're purposely weaving through your story, but then you're also making other things important as well that aren't, your readers are going to get lost.
Yeah. And sometimes you just have to move the story along too, and tell things like this, and this happened, and now we're here. Because not everything needs to be fully fleshed out.
I always get a little sacrilegious when it comes to this rule, because I see its benefit and its point, but sometimes it really frustrates me. So sometimes I see writing exercises where they're like, okay, this is telling, so this is what we're going to change it to so that it's showing. And so like the telling will be like, he was angry. And then the showing will be like, he clenched his fist and his face turned red and his nostrils flared and blah, 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 and showing all these things that show that he's angry instead of saying he's angry. And so I totally get what they're saying. The one is more vivid and alive, and depth, the depth is there. But when I look at those writing exercises, I'm also like, yeah, but one has 3 words and one has 3 long sentences. And so when you're trying to pace your story and move your reader through it, which one moves faster? And so find a better way to say he was angry, but don't necessarily spend 3 sentences on it. Don't spend 3 sentences on every emotion that everybody feels, or, every description of the setting, there's the famous quote, and I should know who said it, and I'll look it up later. And, don't tell me the moon is shining, show me the glint of light on broken glass, which, yes, that's beautiful and that's awesome. But remember, when you're using show, don't tell, did I say that the right way around? Remember, pacing matters. And so it may not be the time to spend 2 paragraphs describing the way the light is glinting off the broken glass. Use as few words as possible that are vivid and have the impact. So maybe don't say he was angry, but use one very, very strong description to paint that anger, instead of 3 sentences of it. More and more and more, when I see examples of how to show something, it's turning a very brief idea into this very long description. And that doesn't help with pacing something fast. So always go for economical, vivid, strong, high impact words to do your showing when you decide to do it. So there's one of my soapboxes. We wanted to make tonight kind of a brief thing because people weren't feeling super well. So do any of you have anything else that you'd like to say about pacing before we look at our questions that we have? We have a few over here, I think. Do we really cover it? Does anybody have any authors that they feel are really good at pacing?
Well, for that, I was going to say, just try to always keep your tension up. That helps with the pacing. And then using like kind of cliffhangers in a good way helps keep people reading too. So,
yep. Awesome. That's back to turning the pages. So do not read Ella Montgomery's Anne of Green Gables series if you want to talk about fast-paced novels, because she
watch the movies. They're very
watch the movies. She's not that. Now, I'm a fan and I love them, but they are a settle in and drink the details in and savor every blossom and every scent and every beautiful, heavy description of the scenery.
Lake of Shining Waters and all the ripples.
Yeah, like, there is a much different pace to that than there is to, one of the like Bourne movies or, one of Stephen King's horror thrillers or, any of these things. Like, just find the pace and the tone of the story that you want to have and read people who do it well and mimic the pacing of their story. So one of the things that we can all do to learn how to do something is to see how closely ours mirrors there. I'm not talking about copying their story. I'm not talking about copying their structure or what they do, but just use, write down in chapter 1, this had me moving. This was what happened. In chapter 2, this happened, and try to destructure how they made it work and use the same concepts in your own writing. So who wants to read the questions over here in our thing tonight? It looks like Tammy has a lot of questions for us. Hi, Tammy. I'm glad that you're here asking questions.
So one of them was, does the pace change throughout the story? And I would say yes.
Yes, it does. Definitely. I think we covered that. Yeah.
And then she answers it. You might want to slow them down on the last few lines of the chapters. Well, I guess that wasn't really a question. Sorry.
That was a good observation, though. Hey, so we had a question about something similar in our Facebook group the other day that this reminds me of. Somebody was asking how to end a chapter on a cliffhanger because they felt like they always ended their chapters with like this little mini resolution, and people were saying you needed to end on a cliffhanger kind of thing or an open question or a hook to keep them going. And she asked how to make that happen. And this is kind of similar to what Tammy was just saying. So like tie your chapter off in that pretty little bow. Oh gosh, I don't know what I'm doing here. Sorry, Tammy. And then just add something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like if you tie your chapter off on a neat little bow and like that's where you end, then add that extra little bit, to hook him. Oh, but wait, I wasn't done with you yet. And then add something else. And it's kind of what she is saying with adding a few lines to slow him down at the end of the chapter. And you can definitely do that. And then if you want it to pick right back up again, it just needs like one question, one hook.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden like, whew.
And don't try to like tease them too much by not giving them any information. Like don't have like them open the door and then gasp. Like show them what's behind the door, or like analogy is like in the Star Wars movies or whatever. Instead of saying Luke, you say Luke, I am your father. Like, and what? Huh? So give them a little something to be like, how, So.
Yeah.
I also wanted to add, though, pacing changes in genres. So, like, for people who are like, I'm writing a romance, and then as an author, I'm reading this, and I'm like, it's taken 5 chapters for the love interest to show up. You're writing women's fiction, not romance. You're writing women's fiction with romantic elements. So make sure you know what your genre expects in terms of pacing. You know, there are fantasies can allow for flowery dancing through the meadows, that kind of language. Thrillers, murder mysteries, probably not. Also, we talked about length of time. So my romances normally take place like in a week or over a weekend. I fell in love really fast. Maybe I figure everybody does. But I have a hard time writing romances that take time over months. I lose interest in the books when they do that. So you just kind of have to know, one, your genre, and then two, what your audience expectation is, so that you are meeting the genre-specific pacing schedule.
Yeah. And I think that feeds right into Tammy's last question if somebody wants to grab that last question.
What about the difference between pacing and different length books? Is there a rule of thumb?
Yeah. So obviously the shorter your story is, the faster you need to go. You can't
Or
spend,
start at a place closer to the end than you
yeah.
would.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to spend if you like right now I'm writing a 15,000 word short story. And so I don't want to spend a lot of time on description and my character looking around and thinking and feeling things necessarily, because I have a lot that I have to make happen in 15,000 words. And so not only do I want to keep the reader moving through the story, but I want to be able to, make sure that the important things happen at the right time. And so sometimes the pacing is about the choices of when you make things happen and how you make them happen, and not just the actual words that you use. And that's kind of what Amy's talking about, like how quickly can you make someone fall in love? Well, you can make them fall in love in a really short period of time, as in like matter of days, as long as you kind of, I think, slow your pacing down in the actual writing, so that you're spending more time with those intimate moments where they talk and they share feelings and they make connections. If all of those things are happening scene to scene to scene to scene, it might happen, within a 2-day period, but because you've slowed it down so that you show all those moments, those important moments and milestones along the way, it's just as effective as showing the same beats, the same points across a romance that takes a month. So it's all about delivering the right things to the reader in the right timing, and not about the actual time frame of the story. So you can look at pacing as like how quickly you tell a story that happens in a short period of time or a long period of time. So 15,000. Huh?
I think length of book also depends on what extra side plots you've added into your story. So what come to mind is my misunderstanding book, this Sweetwater High book that we all wrote in. And mine, it was longer because she had all these different other relationships that affected her decision making, that I had to make sure they had their story arc with her. So I think if you have a longer book, it's normally because you have relationships with different people that they have to balance. Normally when I write my romances, mine stay about 45 to 50,000 words because it's heavily romance. And so it gets annoying to the reader to keep having this will they, won't they, will this, won't they, will they, won't they, this back and forth where they're just like, this is annoying, stop it. So you kind of have to play with that as well. If you're making the romance stretch out too much, then your readers get annoyed with you. But if you do like writing longer books with bigger character arcs, with her finding who she was in the story, and that's a lot of YA too. YA is very issue driven, and you have to think about, as a single adult, you really don't have a ton of relationships that you're working on. But when you're a kid in a household, you have relationships that you're constantly with. You have your parents and your siblings and your friends. And so there's a lot more character arcs that can be going on, or story arcs that can be going on within.
Yeah, and it's not always just relationships. It can be other opposition in their life.
Right. So. But normally it's based around another relationship with a person, though.
Yeah, that is true.
So I've been watching a murder mystery series, and it's interesting that the pacing of the clues is very structured. So as you watch the beats of the story in a murder mystery, you get the red herrings and you get the clues and you get the kind of like character's own little personal story moments. They're all hitting at the same time, like in every episode, because and that is the pace of a murder mystery. Like, you can't mess with it a whole lot. You can't have like, oh, boom, dead body, here's a clue, I'm going to go spend 3 chapters on the novice detective's personal life here for 3 chapters and forget there's a murder going on. Oh, but wait, now we're going to look at the murder again because here's another clue. You have to very carefully structure when all the different elements of a story are going to happen. So it's hitting all those beats, that scene and sequel, it's revealing the clues, like all the different, whatever story you're writing, you have to hit the mark at the right time. And that is another element of pacing. So we've talked about pacing as being a lot of different things. That it's how you as the writer choose to structure your story to move the reader through it. It's the pace at which your reader is going to actually physically read the book. And it's also how you are able to shape and mold the time frame that you're working in, whether it's a week or a year or a month or a day. So pacing has a whole lot of different layers and a whole lot of different applications. But as long as you understand what it is that makes things move fast and make things move slow, then you can be master of it. And you can be the puppeteer to make things happen the way that they need to. And I think we'll all agree that the best way, after you think you've done what you need to do, is to let someone else read it and tell you whether or not you succeeded. So that's all the questions we have. That's all the thoughts we have on pacing. I hope that some of this was helpful for you. I hope all of you will go and look at your work in progress and be very mindful and aware of the importance of pacing and how you can be controlling it as you're working going forward. So before we get off of here, we just wanted to mention that we are having a Writing Gals Romance Conference in August of 2020. It'll be the 6th through the 7th in the Salt Lake Valley somewhere. And as soon as we have a definite venue lined up, we will be announcing that. But one of the fun things we did this week was we got 10,000 followers on our Facebook group. And as part of that celebration, we announced that we are going to give away 1 scholarship for free registration to our conference. And it is going to be for open for applications until November 1st. And if you want to apply for that scholarship, then you can go to our Facebook group and there's a post there with a Google form and you can fill in all the information. It's got a lot more details and rules and all that sort of stuff. But if it's something you think you're interested in, go to our Facebook group and check it out. And if you aren't part of our Facebook group, then what are you waiting for? Go join it. And if you haven't subscribed to our podcast, do it right now. Hit the subscribe button and the bell button so you get notified. Give us a like if you enjoyed this podcast. And we are really appreciating it.
Talk about what we're going to do next time.
Oh, that's a good idea. Is that our fun one next time?
Yeah. So next time, we are going to get the writing guys on our podcast with us. So all of us are bringing our spouses on air where you get to ask all the questions you want to about us or about how to be a spouse or how spouses of writers feel. And sometimes we're not always cognizant of the effect that our writing has on our family. So we were all going to be bringing our spouses on so you can meet them all.
Isn't it crazy that they all agreed to come on and be part of this? So yeah, that's going to be historic. So nobody missed meeting our husbands on our next podcast, which is going to be the first Thursday, right?
Yeah, I think it was like October 3rd or something.
October 3rd. You're going to get to meet our husbands. That's going to be so exciting. Okay, so that's all we have for you guys tonight. It's been a great podcast, and thanks for staying up late with the 4 of us crazy people.